Hey, welcome to the High Dive, where we talk about life, health, and all things Alexander Technique. Today, I have the lovely chance to talk to Robert Rickover. Welcome, Robert.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. This is fun so far.
I hope it's fun. It will be fun. So
sure.
I want to ask you about your work and what you do and how do you do it?
How I teach, is that really what you're getting at, or?
No, I'm getting more global. How do you see the work that you do? What do you try to bring to the world with the Alexander Technique and the way that you approach the Alexander Technique?
Okay. Well, I place a great emphasis on getting students to do as much work for themselves as they can right from the beginning, to start using Alexander's ideas in their own lives. And I want to get them to start using them even in the first lesson, during the lesson. So I tend to emphasize, probably more than some teachers do, Alexander Technique directions, which are basically statements that you make to yourself. There's an art to delivering them, which I go into great detail on, because I think it's almost as important as the direction itself. And I tend to use a lot of what are called freedom directions, which are the product of a colleague, Jennifer Roy Francoli, who lives in Cincinnati, and came up with these about 5 or 6 years ago, and I think they've become fairly popular. I find they're very easy for most people to use, and they're quite effective. I use them for myself all the time. And so I get students to start experimenting as soon as possible, using directions, seeing if they work. If they don't work, we talk that through. We run experiments pretty much from the first lesson.
Could you give an example of a freedom direction?
Well, the most general freedom direction is I am free. And I go through quite a bit of explanation about how to use it, not to attempt to implement it in any way, not to even be particularly interested in what it means. It's just something you're going to play with. And I typically begin the experimental phase of the first lesson with walking. And I'll have them walk and use that direction. And then at some point, I'll ask them to throw the direction away. And very often, there'll be a dramatic change in their walk at that moment. That's not just felt, but heard, because I have wooden floors, and you can just hear the clunk coming back into their walk, which is really just their old habit reasserting themselves. And then I experiment with, well, now that you've noticed that, you could gently bring the direction back again and see what happens. And that's the sort of thing I experiment with a lot, starting not instantly usually, but certainly at some point during the first lesson. Because I want people to start using these directions in little experiments that I outline for them several times a day, so that they can build up confidence in them and they can start using them for all sorts of activities. I have a special fondness for walking because most people do it anyway, and why not use that to experiment with these new ideas? But I emphasize they're really for any activity they do.
That's wonderful. So how did you come to the Alexander Technique?
I was living in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, working for the Ontario government. I was a research economist, and I had very little interest in anything like what the Alexander Technique is. Of course, I'd never heard of it, but I stumbled onto it through an article. I was intrigued. I initially thought oh, that'd be great for my girlfriend. She likes to dance in her free time. She was always taking dance lessons. And I showed it to her, but she wasn't interested. But I put it away, and about a half a year later, I remembered it. And also I had one of the people at work was taking lessons, and she was having some pretty good experiences with it. And I thought, well, I'm just going to go up and have a lesson and see what happens. There was only one teacher in all of Canada at the time, and he happened to be in Toronto. Yeah. So I went up, I had a lesson, I had no idea what it was about. But I was intrigued enough to book a lesson the following Saturday. But the next day, all sorts of weird things started happening that initially I couldn't understand. But pretty soon it became clear they had to do with something to do with this Alexander technique thing. It was pretty striking. And then over the next few weeks, all sorts of stuff happened. It was mind-boggling. I gained almost an inch in height. I had to buy new clothes. It was unbelievable. So I was hooked pretty early on. I had no understanding of what the process was. Absolutely zero.
But you felt free.
I felt easier. I felt very different. Yeah, I was taller. I was more expanded in my chest. It was a problem because I had to wear jackets to work, So I had to get some new clothes. The trousers were all too short. And, over time, I made a point of trying to learn as much as I could about what this process was. My teacher was not particularly helpful. His English was limited. And he had a style of teaching that was pretty much straight up hands-on work. Now, his hands were good, but he did not have very good verbal skills. So I read what was available. Some of it made a little sense. Some of it I really couldn't grasp, but I knew it was a good thing. And eventually I decided to go to England and train.
Wow. So you left working for the Canadian government to going into a training course.
The provincial government. Yeah, I thought this is way more interesting than anything I'm doing, working for these guys, and I was able to do it, and so I did it.
And I bet you've never looked back.
Never looked back. Never. My training course, I got to say, was one of the best experiences I ever had. It was wonderful. I hardly ever missed a day of class. I came in early and left late.
That's terrific. And then you moved back to the States after that?
Back to Canada originally. I moved back to Toronto, and I taught there for about 9 years. And then I had discovered a teacher who used to live here in Lincoln. She's passed away now, Marjorie Barstow. And I had started taking workshops with her even while I was still on the training course in England. I would fly back at Christmas break and take her 2-week intensives. And so I had a pretty good idea what she was about. And I was immediately convinced that she was the best that I had encountered. And so I wanted to max out on working with her. And in 1990, she stopped traveling. And I thought, well, this would be a good time for me to come to Lincoln and organize workshops for her here. She was 91 at that point, and we did a bunch of workshops here over the next few years.
So if I may ask this question.
Sure.
What are the 3 big takeaways that you received from working with Marjorie that you would like to share with other Alexander teachers and Alexander students?
Well, she was known at the time. I mean, when I was in London, I heard about her, and I heard that she worked with groups, and that intrigued me because at that time, group work was not really acceptable. It was very there were a few people doing small groups in London, but there were some huge controversies about that, and and I thought, wow, I want to know how she does it. Because that seemed kind of an interesting thing. So that one takeaway is that there is a way to work with groups, and in her case, very large groups, and work very efficiently with she used her hands, but pretty sparingly. But she was what she was about was getting people to start thinking for themselves in a way that I had not encountered in the Alexander world before. So that's one thing. What are some other things about Marge? She came up with some new directions that she used. She didn't have anything negative to say. The standard Alexander directions were something like my neck to be free, my head to go forward and up, back to lengthen and widen, that sort of thing. And the emphasis was, well, you don't do anything. You just project those directions. She came up with a different approach, which was phrases like, move your head very delicately away from your body in such a way that your body would follow. My sense is she was coming with this issue about are directions movements or not movements? Are they pure thoughts? She was approaching that funny boundary from the movement side as opposed to from the no movement side. And to me, it worked a lot better, and I liked it. I don't use those directions now, but they made a huge difference to me at the time.
And was there a third thing?
Third thing. Well, one thing I got from Marge, her workshops, and sometimes they were, the first one I went to, there were maybe 25 people, and that was a small one. Later on, she was doing 50, 70, 100 people at a shot over in her summer workshops. One of the things that was very striking about her workshops was that anyone could come. You could be a teacher, you could be someone off the street, didn't matter. And it was tough to figure out who was who if you looked around. It wasn't always very clear.
Right.
And the most interesting moments in any of her workshops were when a new person came and had their first encounter with Marge. Everyone wanted to know what was going to happen because she had a way of speaking and interacting with people that was very different from the sort of classic, I would say, the classic Alexander technique approach.
Well, I remember going to a workshop you gave on how to help groups. And what I loved about it was starting from where you were. I mean, you just opened the group up and you said, just bring in, just do an activity, whatever activity you want to do. Let's just start from there. And I found that very freeing and very opening. I gained a lot from that. So I think that's a part of Marge's legacy.
Yeah, I got that from Marge. And the way she ran her workshops, it would never have occurred to me that you could do that until I experienced it.
Yeah.
It was like a totally different world, a very down-to-earth world, very friendly, easygoing world. People had fun, and people learned an enormous amount. People made huge, huge changes.
Well, she's certainly a hit. Many of my students will find your website and then they'll come back and they'll say, who's that little old lady?
Very small. Yes. Yeah. She was a remarkable human being.
You're very fortunate to have known her.
I count that one of the great blessings of my life to have even known about her, and to have studied with her as much as I did.
We should do a whole Be Live Facebook about Marge. That would
I'd be happy to do that. Sure.
That would be great. So Robert, if you were to have a slogan.
I'm ready for this one. I'm ready for this question. Yes, slogan about the Alexander technique. Well, I got to say, I'm not a slogan kind of guy by nature, but I heard a slogan that I think it's not really a slogan, but it's a concept.
Okay.
That I had never heard before. I heard it in connection with a segment on PBS NewsHour a couple of weeks ago. There was a little piece about Zappos, which is a shoe company. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I am.
My wife's very familiar with it. headquartered in Las Vegas,
Okay.
internet shoe and other things company that has, they're famous for their customer service. But they're less well known for their incredibly quirky corporate structure, which is not like any other corporation. There's very little hierarchical management. Everyone there is encouraged to figure out better ways to do their job, or the best way they can do the job. And the president of the company, or CEO, I forget, referred to that as self-management. That's what they encourage. And I thought, self-management is exactly what Alexander teachers teach their students. Now, there's some differences. He was talking about they're making decisions about what they were going to do, whether they were going to approach a task one way or the other. And we're not so much interested in what people do as how they do whatever they're doing. So it's like individual self-management, you could say. But that word just seems to capture something for me.
Definitely.
Yeah, self-management. I would also say, again, it's not strictly speaking a slogan, but to me, the Alexander technique is the ultimate do-it-yourself project for you.
Yes, I love that.
You're the kind of person that likes to do stuff for themselves. Just turn that attitude towards you. How am I functioning, and how can I improve it?
I love that.
That really is what this is
yourself. Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Robert, it's been wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for doing this. It's been fun.
And any Alexander teachers out there, I would love to chat with you. And your students, or any Alexander students out there, I would love to chat with you. I am hoping to use this platform to spread the good news about this amazing technique that Robert teaches and I teach, and we're out there and we're eager to share with you our knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.